What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bischoff and Brown right here on the Detroit Lions podcast. He's Scott Bischoff. I'm Russ Brown. We are back after a little hiatus down at the Senior Bowl. Got sick. It was a whole nightmare, but you guys got plenty of Jeff and Chris down there. So hopefully you guys have been enjoying those interviews and the content that they provided, because I was absolutely useless. But Scott, my man, we are back. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you? I'm glad you're okay and you're back and all that stuff.
Yeah, nope. A little bit of a bummer trip, but shit happens, and we're back, so we're good.
Quite literally, I'm sure, for you, but okay.
Yeah, no, we're good, but we're excited. We're going to be talking some Myles Garrett here. We're going to talk some Lions D line. We'll talk Shamir Stewart, the Texas A&M defensive lineman, and we'll just write the quarterbacks off now for this draft class. And maybe we'll start there, just because it's going to be quick and easy. Because it's kind of been a thing that's popped up through social media, and I get it. You can't believe everything on the internet. I get that. And I can't believe every article that's ever posted on the internet, because there's some guys out there that are just clickbaity. And there's different trade scenarios that have popped up for Myles Garrett. And we'll get into Myles Garrett and the defensive line. But just looking at quarterbacks, specifically with Cleveland, there was this trade scenario of like giving a first-round pick and Hendon Hooker for Myles Garrett. Now, there's also trade scenarios popping up on like ESPN for Jahmyr Gibbs and a first-round pick for Myles Garrett. And it's like, okay, that never will that ever happen. And the same thing is the case for Hendon Hooker. They're not going to trade him. I don't know where this rumor is coming that the Lions don't have confidence in him. If it's because Teddy Bridgewater played a few snaps in the postseason, let it go, folks. It's just a one-off thing, and it's just what it is, so looking at the quarterbacks, so in this draft for 2025, they're just off the board for Detroit. I would be stunned if they drafted one. I'd be stunned if they had any interest in any of them, because it's not a good draft for this position at all. And I feel bad for the teams that have to draft one, because they're going to attach the wagon to some guys that, yeah, they have some tools, but I don't know if these guys are going to develop at all. It's going to be bad. I don't know if I'm crazy in thinking that. I think it's just
no. I don't think you are. I mean, I think there are a consensus two that are in round one, maybe three if you include Jackson Dart. The wild card in all of this is Quinn Ewers, I think, and I think there will be some wildly divergent opinions on him. He is incredibly frustrating to try to evaluate, and quarterback play in and around itself is it's an almost impossible thing to do. But so I'm with you. I don't think that the Lions are necessarily in the market for the position, but it's Cam Ward from Miami, who's taken a kind of a interesting path to get to Miami and to get to this point. He went to Incarnate Word for 2 years, and then he went to Washington State, played in what was the Pac-12 for 2 years. He didn't go off out there. He didn't. And then he transferred to Miami, played in his fifth year, and had the year he had last year. I don't know what you think of his game, but to me, he's got a crazy good arm, and he can make ridiculous throws. I just don't know. I don't know how much he's going to function inside, the structure of an offense, and I don't know what that necessarily means for his prospects as a player. I would be very nervous to draft him. Yeah.
I'm with you. I think he's a guy that you mentioned. He can make almost every throw. He throws from some crazy angles at times. He drops the ball in the bucket, throws some actual legit lasers across the field. But he's a guy that my biggest issue is the drifting towards the sideline and just shuffling and waiting for something to open.
Like, hey,
That's not
your
gonna happen.
first read was wide open and you turned it down.
Yep.
And now you got sacked.
Yep.
Right. So, and both he and Sanders have that kind of, I don't know how much I want to pin on the offensive line for Sanders, but I think there's some, but not a lot. Mm-hmm. But they're both, I think, guys who you have to build. So this is where it comes down to it for me. I would trust Shedeur Sanders to run my offense and to execute it at a relatively high level more than I would Ward, while understanding that Sanders doesn't have the athletic ability and arm talent that Ward does. Yep. So, if you're a team, and there are teams who need quarterbacks, like Tennessee needs one, Cleveland needs one, the Giants need one,
the Jets,
yeah, the Raiders need one. So there's teams that need some of these guys. I just don't expect them necessarily to get involved in, moving up and trading up to go get one of those guys. But you never know. I mean, the league is thirsty for quarterback play. They just are. So I don't know. I mean, Shedeur to me is like, I think he can make, I think he's smart. I think he understands what teams are trying to do, defenses are trying to do. I think there's a lot of cerebral in his game. He's just, in some ways, is a touch on the limited side. And I'm not talking about rushing yards and all that stuff, because college football does a weird disservice to quarterbacks because they tally on their sack totals and their lost yardage. And so that comes off of his running stuff. But I want to say he's been sacked 90 times in the last 2 seasons. And it's like, those are crazy numbers. I don't think Colorado had a good offensive line at all at either season. But still, I think he can function in an offense. You'd have to create one for him and give him talent and all that stuff. I would trust him more than I would trust Ward, but I don't know that either of those guys goes in the top 6 quarterbacks from last year, which is, I guess, where I'm going to land on the whole thing.
Yep. No, I'm with you. And I don't think any of these guys do, right? I mean, there's people out there that are really enamored with Jackson Dart. And it's like, I hear you, but kind of similar to Cam Ward, this is a guy that will look off his initial read and throw something right over the middle of the field on a dig pattern. And it's like, I don't know if that's going to work. Like, I don't think that's going to work in the NFL. Like, I don't know, and that's what makes it tough, because NFL defenses are different from college with what they do at times and the way they structure things and design things. And the same thing in the offensive side of the football on both, the NFL and college. So it makes it interesting, like Jalen Milroe. I've heard a lot of good reports about him, but he's a guy that great athlete, all velocity, all fastball, no changeup. Yep. But he's also a guy that he can make a deep out throw from the opposite hash, but then when he's got it on the same hash, he's throwing it 15 yards out of bounds. Like, there's just a lot of interesting and frustrating things with all of these guys. So it's going to be interesting how they kind of fall and how it all turns out. Again, I don't think it's on the board for the Lions, not just because they have Jared Goff, but because I think they do like Hendon Hooker, not because they dislike Hendon Hooker. I don't think a playoff game implies whether they like him or not. Meanwhile,
the thing is we don't know what they think of him.
Right.
They see him in practice. They see whatever progression there is. We haven't seen it.
Meetings and
yeah. So I think some of this is because we haven't seen it. We just assume that they hate him, and it's like, no, I don't think so.
Right.
Is there a chance that pick just never works because of his age and the fact that Goff is here, and that when he enters his 4th season, whatever it is, he'll be moving on? Yeah, it's possible. Then I would expect them. I mean, if they want to be proactive, maybe they do like a quarterback that they take in round 5 or 6.
Yeah,
in this draft. I don't know who that would be, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
I suppose they could do that, but at this point, I don't think we're talking about quarterback as a position that we need to pay attention to all that much right now. It is 2 days post Super Bowl. So
yeah,
got a long way to go.
And I agree with you. And the worst part of it, and I'll kind of end it here on my end, but the worst part of it is like, you've always had kind of this hope every year of like 4 or 5 quarterbacks going, and that pushes 4 or 5 decent players down. Yeah, that's probably not going to be the case. Like, we're not going to see that run of offensive players that we saw last year, like 15, 16 straight, and then Latu was the first one. Like, it's just probably not going to happen. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see how it goes, and ultimately, you know, if the Lions decide like, okay, they're going to spend a 5th or 6th round pick on a quarterback, I would assume they spent some money in free agency to build some things up on defense, because that's where I want to turn to next. It's just the right and wrong way of building the Lions defensive line, and then obviously the Myles Garrett interest. Is it legit? Where are we going with that? And I'm going to just spew for a second. I'm just going to get this out of the way because there's some nonsense.
Well, that is yours. And I delivered a soapbox to your house earlier, so hop on.
Yeah. Look, I've seen a lot of stuff of just people commenting, whether it's on our YouTube or on our social media platform on X, at Russ NFL Draft, at Bischoff _Scott. Like, I'm seeing things of people calling out Brad Holmes and talking about the disappointment of the Lions and that it should be them winning the Super Bowl and not the Eagles. And they need to follow what the Eagles did in building their offensive line or their defensive line by spending every dollar possible and trading picks. And it's like, hold on a second. They didn't do any of those things. First and foremost, Howie Roseman has only worked for one organization in his life, and it's the Philadelphia Eagles. He's been the general manager there since 2010, which, by the way, when he was the GM, the first draft they spent, the first pick was Brandon Graham, who probably played his last game at the Super Bowl. But like, you know, they drafted Josh Sweat in 2018. He had a monster game. He's set to be a free agent, I believe. Milton Williams, they drafted in the 3rd round of 21. Jordan Davis in the 1st round of 22. And if you don't draft JMO, then you maybe drafted Jordan Davis, but who would you rather have, Jordan Davis or JMO? And then you got Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith, both in the 1st round of 23. Moro Ojamo from Texas was a round 7 pick in 23, and Jalix Hunt was a round 3 pick in 24. But it's like, people always want to point and say, well, they could have had Jalen Carter. They could have had Nolan Smith. Well, they could have, but then they wouldn't have Jahmyr Gibbs. They wouldn't have, you know, Sam Laporta. They wouldn't have Jack Campbell. They wouldn't have Brian Branch. So the list goes on. And it's like,
well, the Jalen Carter one, I'm sorry to interrupt, but no, I don't think Jalen Carter was on the Lions draft board.
He wasn't.
So stop.
Exactly.
You know, the story is yet to be written about the Jalen Carter stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a reason that the Lions did not care for him off the field enough to not really, I mean, you know, maybe that's the argument, is that they should have drafted him and should have took on that risk. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. And it's just like, you know, they spent time rebuilding their offense because their offense was so bad. And like, they realized that it's probably easier or better to build up the offense with the offensive line of drafting Penei Sewell and getting Jared Goff weapons. I mean, that's the key. You got a guy that is limited. Everybody talks about how limited he is, but then they're mad that they went and got him playmakers. It's like, well, what do you want him to do? Like, you got to give him playmakers. You got to get him things. And it's not like they're not rolling the dice on defensive linemen. Broderick Martin, Levi Ozarike, Josh Pascal, Mekhi Wingo, Aiden Hutchinson. Like, these are all guys. Aleem McNeil. But here's the other thing. These are all guys that got hurt. Like, Broderick Martin probably is not going to work out. Let's just call it what it is. He's a healthy scratch every week. He's not developing. He can't stay in shape. Okay, they rolled the dice and they missed on a guy. Yep. But, you know, Pascal's okay. Wingo's fine. Levi's good. Hutch is good. McNeil's great. Like, you got all these guys, and like, we seem to forget that they had 19 players on the defensive side of the football that were on IR. Like, you lost John Kaminsky. You only had Marcus Davenport for a month. And you kind of knew that. But, like, are you upset that they mid-season didn't trade with a red-hot Vikings team in 2023 for Daniil Hunter, who you knew you had to pay? You weren't ever going to trade him. It was an in-season divisional team Like
They were 15-2 this year with all those injuries. What
are we doing? It's just okay. You didn't make it.
Times, I think we are seeing a fan base that's not used to being good, acting like spoiled brats, so to speak. I'm not talking about anybody like in particular. I'm just saying, like, one team wins the Super Bowl. And if the perspective, I don't know what your perspective, I just told you to go ahead and talk and I've interrupted you twice. Sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
If my perspective is not that one team has a successful season and everybody else fails. Some people do believe that, but I don't. I think the Lions took a step this year. They were 15-2. They got the 1 seed. They had an important season considering everybody that they lost. But I also get the frustration that's out there because if the Lions make the Super Bowl, they roll over Kansas City the same way Philly did.
Yeah,
they do. And you're a Super Bowl champion today just because of who you had to play in the Super Bowl, but you didn't get there and they fell short. But a lot of that is because of injuries. The majority of it is injuries. You didn't have Aiden Hutchinson. You lost Lee McNeil and Carlton Davis in the same game. It's just too much to overcome. Yeah. And yet you were still 15-2, the number 1 seed. You had an incredibly successful season. I don't know how we're out on Brad Holmes right now. It is, I don't know, man.
It's crazy. And then there's like this, like people forget, like Vic Fangio was like in Philly, like he's the best defensive coordinator in football. He's been coaching for almost 40 years. Like, is there a shot possibly that just maybe he's a little bit of a better play caller and designs a better game plan than Aaron Glenn ever did? Like, that's probably a good possibility. And like, he put together the perfect plan to stop Mahomes and the Chiefs. And
he did. But how about if we if we consider a few things that are relatively important to this specific matchup? Does anybody think that the Philadelphia Eagles were concerned at all about how Kansas City was going to run the ball on them? Did you think they spent more than 5 minutes thinking about being worried about Pacheco and Kareem Hunt at all?
Didn't seem like it.
No. Does anybody think that they were concerned about what Kansas City's offensive line was going to offer in that matchup? Those are two huge things going in the Lions' favor if they have to play the Eagles.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just, like, I understand the frustration of Philadelphia winning is a problem for some fans, but I think perspective is a good thing. The Lions are a significantly better football team than Kansas City was in the Super Bowl, and I would, it's easy to say it, but I think the Lions give the Eagles everything they could possibly handle if they play the Eagles at home in the NFC Championship game. I do. The Eagles they're not going to just rush 4 in that game. They're not going to be able to do that.
Right.
Look at the weapons the Lions have on offense, the receivers, the tight end, and the running game in totality, and compare it to what Kansas City threw at Philadelphia on Sunday. And it's like, they're worlds apart.
Yep.
Holmes deserves credit for building that.
Yes. And he deserves credit for what he's currently constructing on the defensive side of the football, because he has found some absolute dudes defensively that are turning into some really good players. Brian Branch, like, people are pointing to like, well, they got, Philly got Cooper DeJean in the second round. We got Brian Branch in the second round. Like, some things just fall into your lap, and this past draft was not as productive as we wanted it to be, but we can all agree that corner is just as hard as quarterback anymore in this league because of what they have to deal with. So Terry Arnold, yeah, a little bit up and down. Rakestraw, a little bit up and down. He is kind of a walking hamstring injury, but we knew that when drafting him, and everybody was all about drafting him. So don't tell me like you're going to flip flop now.
You're right. He had the core muscle issue coming into the draft that lingered all year.
Yeah.
Right. 2 years ago, Sauce Gardner was the talk of the NFL, the best corner in football, while Derek Stingley was a bust. And one short year later, they have flip-flopped.
Yep.
And Stingley is the talk of the NFL, and Sauce was kind of not whatever this year. It's a very volatile position.
Yeah.
It shouldn't surprise anybody if Terry and Arnold has a really good year in year two, but like,
it's crazy, dude.
you got to trust that Brad Holmes knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
I understand it. I mean, there's frustration that like 2 years ago, they didn't make a move. They didn't trade for Chase Young, and frustration that Myles Garrett's available and he's going to end up somewhere else. I get all that, but there's a way that these things get built. You said it, and I think it's the best way to say it. Howie Roseman's had 13 or 14 years to put together this team.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been multiple variations of that team that he's been able to put together. And this latest one is with, all the Georgia dudes on their D line.
Yeah.
And Jalen Hurts is their quarterback. They were fortunate enough to trade for AJ Brown and really give up just about nothing,
But also they played their best football on the second half of the season. From their bye week of Philly, they were the best team in football. And up until week 10 or 11, the Lions were the best football team in football. And the thing that changed it was what we've already talked about, the injuries, and things just started catching up with them. And they ended up playing their worst game of the season at the worst time. And Philly just played their best game of maybe ever at the best time. And it's just, that's the way it goes sometimes. So I don't know, man. It's going to be really interesting how this offseason goes. I definitely think, I don't want to say there's pressure on Brad Holmes because I'm not giving him a free pass, but I'm also trusting that the guys that he has picked are, some guys are going to develop, some guys are not. He's already drafted some absolute studs. And at the end of the day, he's going to get another crack at this thing with 6 or 7 different picks in a couple of months. And I think he's going to do just fine because he's shown a good track record. It's not like he's missed on a bunch of guys. He's only missed on a select few guys. And we're kind of jumping the gun saying that he's missing on a guy. Maybe Broderick Martin does figure it out. I don't know. But the only guy that has not made the team is James Houston. That's the only guy that he's swung and missed on so far. And that was a 6th round pick. And it's like, you look at some of these past drafts of Howie Roseman, there's some guys that he's drafted that are no longer on the team. And look at the fact that he gave $3.5 million on a 1-year deal to Zach Bond, and Zach Bond figured it out. And I loved Zach Bond coming out of Wisconsin. He went to New Orleans. He went to New Orleans and he sucked. He sucked.
Yeah.
Mekhi Becton. Everybody loved Mekhi Becton. He went to the Jets. He sucked. Starting right guard on a 1-year deal for the Philadelphia Eagles. They struck gold at the right time on certain guys. Yep. The Lions tried it with Davenport and certain guys, and it didn't work. It didn't work. It's okay. It's not like it's a bad thing. It's not like it's the end of the world. So they're going to
we have to stop acting like they're like the Lions are a cellar dweller and it's the same old shit. They're 15-2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know. And with that, I think, looking at what the Lions are going to do in some of their draft plans, and I think next week we'll get really deep into what maybe some of their draft plans are and start outlining the roster a little bit, and look at another position group, but just looking at some of, and maybe we go even deeper on the defensive line next week, but looking at some of the defensive linemen here, you talked about a guy pre-show, and I wanted to talk about him kind of as like the prospect of the week as we look at right and wrong way of building the Lions defensive line. Because I think you're really hitting on something here as a guy that's kind of belle of the ball, if you will, as you said, is Shamir Stewart out of Texas A&M. Like, he would be a home run fit in Detroit. Realistically, probably not going to be there at 28. But we didn't think Tyrion Arnold was going to be in a certain spot last year, and they were able to move up and get him. Is there something here to where maybe Stewart lands at 21, 22, and you can move up and go get him? And if so, I mean, I get it, Myles Garrett, but I think we can both agree that Myles Garrett probably isn't a realistic option, right? Like, it's probably not going to happen.
I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, the problem is that not only do you have to give up whatever compensation is required to get him, you then have to pay him. And you have to pay him on the waning years of his career. Yeah, he might have 2 dominant years left. But to be competitive, you're going to have to give him a 6-year, almost fully guaranteed deal that's going to pay him, top of the market money. It's going to be a significant contract, and it's going to lead to you not being able to sign Kirby Joseph when he's up, or Brian Branch, or what I mean? Like you're not going to be able to keep everybody if you make that move. There's still a question of whether or not Cleveland even wants to do this. And then it's a matter of, do you want to give up multiple first round picks? Because that's my understanding and thought process at this point. I'm easy. I could easily be wrong, and I'll change my mind or I'll change my perspective on this as we get more information. But I think you're looking at multiple first round picks to acquire Myles Garrett.
Yeah.
The Lions are not in a great competitive situation with other teams because they're picking at the end of round 1.
Yeah.
Right. So if a team offers you 2 first round picks and it's pick 15 this year, and what they think is the middle of their first round pick in 2 years, the Lions have to give up more than 2 first rounders to compete with that.
Yep.
Whether that's a player or throw on a second in there. So, that's kind of the starting point for me, is like, to me, if you want to get aggressive, and you mentioned there being a little bit of pressure on Holmes, to me, there's 2 ways you can do it. Myles Garrett's one of them. You have to give up a ton, then you have to pay him.
Yep.
Or I don't think Shamar Stewart gets out of the top 15. I don't think there's any way he does. So going up from 28 to, say, 12 or whatever, I don't know what the price is, but let's say it's the same cost. Let's say it's the same, you give up pick 28, you give up next year's first rounder, and then you have to give up a third or whatever to make that trade happen. I don't know if, again, I probably should have done the little trade thing and figured it out, but let's assume that the conversation is close enough that it doesn't mean all that much between Stewart and Garrett. I almost prefer the Stewart route, and I know that he's not proven anything in the NFL yet, but I like the idea of not having to pay a guy $35 million guaranteed for a bunch of years, especially the waning years of his career. To me, I think it's a little more risky to do it the Stewart way, and I understand that it would frustrate people. I can already hear it. Like, you could have done the same thing and got Garrett for what you paid to go get Stewart, but there's a money problem with Garrett. And I see Shamar Stewart play, and I think Calais Campbell. And I know that he's not, 18 to 20 sack guy, but 6'6" and 285, whatever he is, moving the way he moves, as productive as he is while ascending to be more productive as a pass rusher, while still being a dominant football player, to me is just, there's so much to love about looking at Stewart and Hutchinson, that pairing together for the next 6 to 8 years, right? And then it's just like, yeah.
Well, and it's a perfect spot because of some of the already established depth on the roster. Like, if they decide to bring back Levi Ozarike, you have him. You have Josh Paschal. You have Zadarius Smith, which I'm assuming he'll be back. Because that's the thing. Like, you have a cheaper way of getting some production off the edge. And let's not look at Zadarius Smith and be like, oh, well, he didn't do anything. He had 9 sacks last year between 2 teams. Like, he was productive. Like, that's fine. And if you had Hutch, again, it's a little bit of a different story. But to your point of Stewart, like, he does so many little things right, too. Like, he's incredibly versatile, but he's doing a lot of little things right. He takes on blocks really well, like on a split zone from a tight end. He's able to fight pressure with pressure and squeeze gaps down. And what do you think the Eagles did? Like, Nolan Smith, he blew up one of the offensive tackles, Jawan Taylor. And it's like, or no, I think it might have been Trey Smith polling. Like, he was blowing things up left and right. Shamar Stewart can do that for you. So while I love the idea of Myles Garrett, I love it. I would love it. It would be
I did too.
Give me the lotion, sign me up. But it's like, it's not it's not realistic because they're not going to give up multiple picks to make it happen because they value those picks. Meanwhile, it takes two to tango. And I don't think Cleveland really wants to tango with anybody, specifically a team like Detroit, because they know, like you mentioned, the draft value of where it's going to be. But also, like if they move on from him, they have to eat some dead cap space there for him to not be there. Yeah. And they're not going to do that because they just gave some goon $250 million guaranteed. Like they put themselves.
And they're trying to build a stadium. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Like he's the face of that franchise.
You're trying to sell those tickets. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot. And it's not as easy as going on a simulator and pressing a couple buttons or writing an article and making you click and making you believe it. Cause it doesn't seem like a realistic option. And I think you're right with Stewart. I think he's a top 15 pick all day long.
And it may not be a realistic option for Stewart either. They may not be willing to pay the price to go get him.
Yeah.
So then it's, all right, you're sitting at 28 and what's the group of edge talent at 28 that you feel like, yeah, let's go grab that guy? And, they're going to have to do that at some point. They're going to have to, I mean, you can't, I don't know if what they're going to do in free agency. I mean, it's untold. We don't know. But, is it James Pierce from Tennessee? Is it, Mike Green from Marshall? I don't know so much about him. I haven't heard great things about the off the field stuff with him. Mm-hmm. Don't know that he's a culture fit for the Lions specifically.
Is it Nick Scorton, the kid out of Texas A&M? And is he fit? Is he kind of like Josh Paschal 2.0 though? Like it's all kind of power then speed, but he tries to put speed to power. He's more of a power rusher, He makes sense. I like him. I don't love him.
Yeah. But I think it's a group of undersized guys where I would love like Josiah Stewart in round 2.
Yes.
Home run pick. But it's still, it's not the premium, rock star talent that Shamar Stewart is.
Yeah.
There's a dude from Boston College who I think should be right on that end of day 1, early day 2 range. Don't know how to say his last name, but it's Donovan Iziraku. Let's just go with that for now.
Yep. Something like that.
He was at the Senior Bowl. That dude is a freaky pass rusher. And problem is he's 6'2" and like 255. Now that's not small. It's short, right?
And it doesn't fit the Lions really.
It doesn't really fit what the Lions. The Lions want that power edge.
Yep.
Because of Martin profile, right? Like Shamar Stewart fits that. It's just the cost to go get him is going to be similar to the cost that you would have to pay to go get Garrett.
Yeah.
And I could be talked into going to get Garrett and pushing. At that point in time, you're getting all your guys back. We have not talked about Aleem McNeil. I do not think he's going to be back and ready to play by week 1. So we all have to recognize that it's likely that McNeil's not ready early.
Yeah.
Toledo has a defensive tackle who I really like, Derek Alexander.
Mm-hmm.
He's a dude.
He is. And he's versatile.
Oregon has Derek Harmon. He's a really good player too. Like those guys, I think they would fit, and they would fit even with Aleem McNeil back. But some of that needs to be considered.
Yeah.
But it's just I'm not sure what the best way about going about it. But to me, the Garrett thing would be the lesser of all of the things. But I'd understand it because then it does feel like, all right, we're at the final table, and I like my king queen suited here. I'm pushing all in kind of thing. Where that does feel like an all in kind of move, but that's not a Brad Holmes kind of move. So, we'll see.
Right. No, I'm with you. And I think we can go a little deeper next week on more of the defensive line. Because I think that's the sweet spot. I think that's the position of need. I think that's the place that they're going to start this thing off. I'd be a little surprised if they double dipped that corner in back-to-back years just because of the development that it takes. And it sounds like they want Carlton Davis back at the right price, but I think they've got trust in Amik Robertson. I think they like Ennis Rakestraw. I think they love Terrion Arnold. So I think there's enough there where you're like, okay, they could probably pass till day 2, day 3 to get another corner in here. I think it's a need. I don't think it's top of the list, though. I think defensive line, though, getting a pass rush and getting some of that stuff resolved because they got guys up. I mean, Kaminsky's up, Levi's up, Marcus Davenport's up. There's guys that are going to have to be renewed or let go. And I think some of these guys, just because of the injury history, are probably going to be let go.
Yeah, the three names you just mentioned, I would all expect to not be back. I hope Carlton Davis is back. He was really good.
Yeah.
But I don't really think that Davenport's a player in the mix. Just with the injury history, I mean, you got to be available, right?
Yeah.
Onzarike had an opportunity with a bunch of injuries to make a lot of money for himself and just didn't.
Yeah.
Right. And Pascal didn't either. Like, those guys are, they need to be deployed a certain way. It would be great if they had a big edge and those guys were rotational pieces. Then you'd say, yeah, we're cooking.
Yeah.
But who that big edge is, I don't know. It's
is it Landon Jackson, Arkansas? I mean, that's kind of that mold. I mean, but there's some limitations to his game.
Oh my God. When I see that guy play, I mean, if you looked up the word stiff in the dictionary, it's a picture of him. Like,
yeah.
And there was one little thing. This is where it gets, you have to check your own stuff. So there was a little drill that he was doing with somebody after one of the practices, and it was essentially how to set up the bull rush with your feet. And I'm thinking, this dude's at the Senior Bowl and really?
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of all he has. He's big with long arms and is powerful.
Right.
What have you been working on? Like, I mean, I wanted to see him turn the corner. That didn't happen in anything, in any of the one-on-ones or any of that stuff.
But it's on his tape like that too. He doesn't do that often either.
He doesn't. So the fact that he was still trying to figure out his feet with bull rush stuff was a little bit like, wow, he's behind.
Yeah.
He's that far behind. That's also nitpicking because it was, 7 seconds of something I saw on the TV. So take it for whatever it's worth. But
that stuff matters. I mean, those little coaching points that you see at practice, whether it's through coach's film or on TV or being there, it all matters because it's eye-opening. And you're like, well, that guy's really struggling, or, oh, that guy's really taking that coaching and he applies it the next day. And you're like, oh, it's working for him. Like, yeah, those things matter. Going away from the Senior Bowl, looking at the Shrine Bowl, and I know we need to wrap this up, but talking to another guy like that maybe fits, Tyler Barron, Miami, Florida. Really like what I saw from him at the Shrine. Watched two of his games going down to Mobile. Again, he was at the Shrine Bowl in Dallas, but just watching him, I'm like, he kind of fits. Versatile, has some power to his game, a little bit of speed, but more power, likes to long arm. I could see him being a fit. But it's just like, where's that sweet spot? Are you passing on a pass rusher in the first round and maybe take a guy like that in the third round? Yeah, maybe, so we'll see how it goes. You mentioned James Pierce, would love it. I think maybe that's a guy we highlight a little bit next week, but would love him, but I'm with you. With Stewart all day long, that would be the dream scenario. I think there's another guy too, maybe Walter Nolan, Ole Miss, if we want to talk interior defensive lineman. So we'll mix and match a little bit next week on the D.
Dude is twitched up.
Yes. Wow. Another guy that might be gone. So it's just like, what do we do? And there's a lot of tweeners here because there's a lot of big, there's just guys that are big that play on the edge, but they might be more of a 4-eye 3-tech at the next level. Jordan Birch, for example, out of Oregon. I don't know if he's going to be consistently a 5 at the next level. He might be better suited as a 4-eye. So there's different alignments and things that we're going to have to talk about when we talk about some of these guys, but we'll pick that up next week. You got anything else to add on Stewart or anybody else?
No, again, it's 2 days post Super Bowl, so it's a little early to be focusing, singularly on a player, but it was just as an example about here's Garrett's cost, here's the price to trade up for a player that you love into the top 15.
Yep.
It's similar. You can do it either way.
Yep.
Both are aggressive moves. There's pluses and negatives around each one. Yeah. Well, yeah, whatever. It's good.
Nope. Yeah. I think it was a good discussion, and I had to vent a little bit. So I appreciate you letting me vent a little bit. And we had to get quarterbacks off the board. I just had to talk about them briefly because they suck.
Let's wait till next year.
Exactly.
Yep.
But as always, you guys can find us on Twitter or X at Russ NFL Draft and at Bischoff_Scott. And of course, you can rate, review, and subscribe to the Detroit Lions podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other podcast platforms. We'll be back next week doing some more of this stuff like we mentioned. So you guys have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the start of the offseason here as we get post-Super Bowl. We'll be back next week. He's Scott Bischoff. I'm Russ Brown. This has been Bischoff and Brown right here on the Detroit Lions podcast.